The landscape of whitetail research is quickly changing, and I brought in Derrick with Whitetail Research to share some of his findings.
One thing that's worth saying is that if GPS color studies tell you everything that I can tell you off of my research, then they would be, but they can't.
I wanted to potentially debunk or solidify some of the things that we conventionally think about whitetails.
The main thing that I've seen that a lot of people just have in the back of their brain is the idea of bucks bedding on the leeward side of the ridge, and also maybe even the way that they travel with the wind and in terms of traveling into a headwind and stuff like that. And from what I've seen, you can just throw all that out the window and start trying to apply thermals into all those situations.
And we get into all of that right now on the Whitetail Podcast presented by Moultrie.
The statistic that I started focusing on was actually net displacement. If a deer's bedded in the morning and then he makes his travel route and then he beds back down, what's the distance between those two locations? And in the morning, it was almost always 4 times greater than in the evening.
Derrick, welcome to the Whitetail Podcast. How you doing this morning?
Yeah, man, thanks for having me on. I'm doing pretty good. A little bit tired, but pretty good.
Well, thanks for making the time here. I firmly believe what you're doing here is reshaping a lot of whitetail knowledge, or I guess you're in a constant process of maybe approving, disproving theories, or at least just laying out the information of what you've been seeing. But I want to give you an opportunity to briefly introduce yourself, because you just bolted onto the scene. It's like,
I didn't even introduce myself on YouTube. It's no one needs to know my name. I just hop on.
Yeah. So who are you, man?
And well, my name's Derrick Dixon, and I'm just kind of a longtime bow hunter. Been passionate about wildlife and wildlife research and land management, all these types of things. And in 2019, starting in 2019, I got married. That was kind of like the big shift for my life. I got married in that time frame, and then I also got a new job, and I became a tech guy at a private school. And I was living in a bigger city. I'd kind of was still going to college a little bit for conservation biology, but I was really kind of now focusing and shifting focus towards this technology job because it was paying the bills and a little bit more pretty good for me. And then it was kind of a life shift for me at the moment. And at that time frame as well, though, I was pretty passionate about kind of cameras and photography and videography. And I owned some drones. And at the time, I actually had the DJI Inspire. And I saw that you could get a thermal camera attachment for the DJI Inspire. And whenever I seen that, it was like, surely to goodness, you could use that thermal attachment on this drone and see whitetail deer with it. I don't know like the scale at which you could do it or how consistently you could find them, but that was whenever like I first realized you could probably do something with this. And then, I didn't buy it. It was way too expensive, and I just got married and we're trying to figure out all sorts of stuff. And time had kind of moved on a little bit more, and it was 2022, the DJI Matrice 30T came out. And I remember whenever it came out, I started kind of freaking out a little bit and showing it to everybody that I knew and that would have potentially been interested. And I was telling them all the things that it could do for whitetail research. And a lot of people were just kind of looking at me with blank stares like, okay, like that's a cool idea, but it's not like earth shattering or anything like that. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like it'd be the first time ever in the world that you could do something like this. Like that's a big deal. And everyone's just like, okay, like that's a cool idea type thing. It's a really expensive drone though. And I'm like, it is expensive. And I couldn't afford it either at the time. But I was going to find a way. And I remember kind of like telling my wife whenever I first saw this, like, if I have to sell my truck and ride a bike to work, like I'll do that. Like I will own this drone type situation. And then shortly after, it was announced that our first kid was going to be born. And that immediately halted all financial whatever being saved towards the drone and kind of shifted towards the fact that I have to be a dad. And how dare my kid be born? Yeah, what a problem. And I'm just kidding. I love my son. And then time moved on a little bit more. I was working in the office a lot as a tech guy and just kind of really wanting to be outside a lot more than I was. And my job role was pulling me more and more towards the office and making it to where I couldn't go back to kind of like my home area and go outside on the farm, and then also go out on public lands up where I was in my area. I wasn't able to find time to just go hunting in the evening that very often. And it was putting me in a weird mental state. I was getting really depressed and kind of in a honestly really dark place. And my boss had noticed that, and he was also one of my really good friends. And he just pulled me off to the side one day, and we went off to a lunch, and he was kind of feeling me out, and like, what's going on, man? Like, you're not fulfilling your job role. You're not, just something's off. And, we talked about it for a while, and end of the lunch, and we kind of moved on, and a month or two had passed, and my second kid was born. So I had taken paternity leave, and um, Kinsey and I, we made it back home, and we were home for maybe 3 hours, and everything went well. And my friend, my boss, had called me, and he was like, "Hey, man, how did the whole thing go?" And we talked about it for a little bit, and then I could hear that there was just like this little subtle undertone in his voice though the whole time, and he was like, "Yeah, so the real reason in the end that I called you is because I'm gonna fire you." And I was just like, "Oh, okay." Like, he's like, "Yeah, man, I'm kicking you off the cliff, and you're gonna go do your thing. Like, go figure it
Mm.
out." So
Mhm.
it was just because he knew my kind of my dream and moving back home and conducting wildlife research, and he didn't really understand the full capacity of it, but he knew that I had a dream and that I was constantly wanting to go do it, but I just couldn't find the time to do any of it. And I all throughout that time frame from 2020 till this, 2024, I was also a wildlife photographer just as a hobby passion. And so I was always trying to get in the woods to go out and do photography over anything. And I wasn't able to find time to hardly do that at all, as well. So, anyways, that all parted, and I walked in the house, and the first thing I told my wife was, I'm buying the drone." And she's like, "Wait, why are like, okay, like, that's not a big deal, I guess." But and then I told her, "Well, I got fired, so I'm gonna buy the drone, and then we're gonna move home." And she's like, "Rewind, like, you got fired? Like, what are you talking about?" So I kind of filled her in more on that, and we decided that's what we were gonna do. So moved back home. Didn't take a job. That I treated everything, in wildlife and whitetail research like it was my full-time job, so that way I could devote the time needed to it. And versus kicking out videos in 2024, I really felt like I needed to get my boundaries for a year with research and collect enough data to be able to make videos off of it, because I could have made videos just like a day in life type situation throughout
Mhm.
that time frame. But I really wanted to walk away with some kind of like you said earlier with the first video, just kind of like banging on the scene. I
Yeah.
wanted to walk in with some really large topics that nobody had ever done before. And I felt like if sorry, I felt like if I had came on the scene and just started showing what I was doing, then that would have opened a lot more of a window for somebody else to try to do it and all this type of stuff. And I wanted to come out with all of the leading stuff on it
Mhm.
and just kind of establish myself really strongly with it. So yeah,
Well, mission accomplished.
mission accomplished. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, and I think that, um was it nerve-wracking? Because you just got fired, and these drones are not cheap, right? And so
Yeah. Yeah. I
what
mean,
what
to
was the
suggest
mechanics of
that,
that?
yeah,
Like,
to
"Hey."
suggest that I was poor as dirt and still am poor as dirt would be a mild understatement. Like, that's,
Uh-huh.
yeah. So I mean, I pretty much just went into it with the mentality that I was going to live off of savings, and then kind of play the stock market, and maybe I can continue to make it that way for a while. And thankfully I did. And every once in a while, I picked up small ended jobs. Like, I had a thermal drone, so people that knew, they called me for a drone survey on their property. I did a couple of those, and then I did a couple tracks for drone deer recovery. And then also I am a photographer, so I went and did a little bit of real estate photography on days that were just terribly sunny and whatnot.
Mhm.
But in the end, I mean, I wasn't, I don't think that I worked a total of 40 to 60 hours throughout that entire time frame for jobs that were making me money outside of
Yeah.
what I was doing with wildlife whitetail research. I mean, I was really really devoted to whitetail research. So
Yeah. That's really cool. As far as making, kind of bursting into the scene too, and so taking a year to develop, you know, research so you have information to provide. Um, what was that year like not hunting? Because you're a bow hunter, right? You enjoy
yeah,
bow hunting. So it's like you
yeah,
made the ethical decision that, hey, if I'm going to be flying this every day and doing research, I'm leaving my bow at home and not even
mhm.
buying a tag, whatever it is. How hard was that? Because I have to imagine that would have been like full plunge of like, okay, I'm
Yeah,
solely doing this and I'm taking away the safety net of wanting to go bow hunt because that's obviously you're interested in whitetails. Like,
yeah,
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 that's why you're
yeah,
doing this.
yeah. No, I mean, it wasn't as big of a deal as a lot of people would think it to be. because I had already pre-designed it in my brain that getting a big buck put on my wall wasn't my main priority anymore in life. I just even as a hunter, like I enjoyed going out and doing doe management and whatnot, and in the end, like I would still love to go and hunt mature bucks, but the way that I position myself, it's kind of a little bit weird to do that, especially on different private properties. I could see myself doing it again on public land, but in terms of doing it on research properties, I just can't see myself doing that. But the reason I was able to enter that with that kind of mentality that I was okay with not going bow hunting like at all, was really probably from my grandpa, because my grandpa he's in his 80s, and all throughout while I was growing up, he was doing kind of trail camera studies and doe buck analysis and pretty detailed stuff actually. And he would always name the deer on this main property that I've shown on YouTube so far, and just kind of really had a love and a passion for wildlife management. And he would do the land management side of things as well and help out with food plots. There were a couple other guys that did too. Um, but in the end, like I'd seen that through him for a long time. And I remember he helped me and my cousin and some other people get mature bucks killed on our wall. He kind of taught us how to do everything. And then he walked us through the whole process, and he kind of strategically set us in certain areas that might have been better than others. And as I got older, I started kind of realizing, like, throughout that whole time frame, he wasn't killing anything himself. So me and a cousin and a couple other people, we started shifting our focus towards like, how do we get him back on mature bucks? Like, so let's make his spots a little sweeter than everywhere else, and let's like really kind of position him in a location where he can kill mature buck. And we'd done that successfully a couple times. And I remember one time I took him out there, and I was bow hunting off on the backside of the property, and he was kind of in this area that he liked to go to. And we made it back to the cabin, and we were both talking about some of the deer that we saw, and I'd seen like 13, so I told him about those, and he was just kind of like, "Oh, okay." And then he was like, "Yeah, I saw one of those, one of the target bucks this season, and it was just like 150 inch, 155 inch mainframe 10, really beautiful 6-year-old buck." And I was like, "Okay, well, how," he had a crossbow. I was like, "Well, how far out was he?" And he was like, "Oh, he stood at about 35 yards for 15 minutes." And it's just like, what were you doing? Like, why didn't you shoot him, man? And he's like, "Oh, I just thought he was the most beautiful deer I'd ever seen in my life." And I was like, "Okay." And he's like, "I just," and in the end, he kind of started having this revelation in his brain where it's just like, "I just like watching them." Like he really enjoyed observing their behavior, and that's still the way he is today. He could go out there 100 times, and if he doesn't kill anything, he doesn't really care. He really enjoys seeing and observing mature buck interactions and behavior types. And that started wearing off on me as time went on. And that's where the wildlife photography thing kind of kicked up more. And I started trying to get sub 30 yards extremely consistently on mature bucks, because obviously, even with a 600 millimeter lens, you really need to be pretty close for pretty high end photography. So
Right.
I was pretty passionate about that, and kind of taking my bow hunting skills and everything and shifting that towards photography. So I had already been not hunting for at least 2 to 3 years going into this study.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense because when I was man, and I think that's a really cool outlook on that too. Like for the love of whitetails. I mean, that's really what
Yeah.
that boils down to is just for the love of whitetails and trying to learn. And you mentioned in one of your videos of them like almost like a ghost like figure, and that's totally accurate for someone that only gets to see the bucks that you watch with the drone where you watch them all day. I mean, a guy, if you were hunting, maybe you'd only get a couple interactions with him that whole year, and it might be through brush. And so I think that's just
Mhm.
really, really interesting. Now, my question for you is: so the research farm you've hunted in the past as a kid, and then you started just watching all these deer all the time. What was one of the biggest surprises where you had thought in your head how deer used that farm versus how they actually used it with the drone? Was there a lot of surprises where you're like, "Whoa"?
Yeah. There were quite a few. Like in the early season, I noticed there's some fields around the property, because the property, it's almost 1,000 acres of continuous big timber and kind of hill country. And there's some kind of just CRP and mixed whatever native fields on the north side. And I think they run cattle in them every once in a while. But whenever I'm flying over my property, I can just spin the drone in that direction, and I can still see over their property. I don't have to fly over them.
Mhm.
And in the early season specifically, I'm finding like 15, 25 deer just standing out in these fields and bedding in these fields all the time. And my brain's like, well, why are you guys doing that type situation? So then I started kind of driving the dirt roads and analyzing these fields a little bit deeper. And I started figuring out kind of why, and it was because you couldn't see the fields from the dirt road, and obviously those fields were retaining a lot of native browse. They had water. They had probably the most mature acorn trees that were receiving the most sunlight and the most runoff from water.
On
So
the
they
edges
were,
of the field.
yeah, kind of on the edges of the field. So those ones were going to be producing the largest acorn production, and then they were also probably dropping them the soonest. And so I started kind of like piecing those things together, and it was like starts making a lot of sense why these deer were hanging out there, but we never realized they did. And then another one, the property has a creek that runs through it. I guess technically it's called a river. It's borderline a creek, um, but it's dry most of the season, and whenever it rains and floods and whatnot, then it can get way above your head type thing.
Mhm.
And I'd always wondered how deer traveled across that extremely steep type of section where there's cliffs and bluffs and all sorts of nasty terrain in that area. And I'd really always wondered which travel route they always took to connect kind of the north section of the property to the south section of the property. And that's whenever I realized how effective utilizing that terrain X was. And I'd already known where a lot of the bluffs were and all the cliffs were and whatnot, but I never really pieced it together on a map
Mhm.
to break down where all these funnels really were on a hill country property. And after I did it with this one, and well, at first I saw where a mature buck had walked, and I was like, well, that makes complete sense. And then I figured out the terrain X thing, and I started marking off all these areas where deer literally cannot travel. And then I went in field, and then I kind of re-verified it again, where like there's cliffs and there's bluffs and there's all these things in these areas, so there's no way they can travel through it. And then I mimicked it on other people's properties, and then I started seeing like, oh crap, this is a pretty effective way to like quickly narrow down where deer have to travel on a property, especially in hill country. Now, obviously, it's not the same for like agriculture property, but in the end, like you can really go into like a piece of public if it's hill country and preemptively map out on a software where all of these potential funnels are using that kind of lidar technology, and
Mhm.
then go in field and kind of quickly verify it whenever you're doing your first day scout. And I mean, it'll put you in a dramatic leg up right out front. So
Yeah, and Terrain X, just for everyone that isn't familiar, explain that really briefly. I watched that video, and it was really really cool to see that process. Taking
yeah,
the Terrain X mapping and then tracing it out on Onyx, and then going out and verifying with the field. So real
yeah.
quickly, what is that for people who don't know?
Yeah, TrainX, it's just Onyx owns it, and it's kind of in beta format right now. And there's a particular portion in it where you can drag slope angle, and you can start to adjust the terrain, and it'll shade the terrain dependent upon slope angle. And I'd found, like I'd said, I already knew where a lot of the bluffs and everything were on the property and the cliffs. So and there's a lot of like 5 to 8 foot ones that run inside of these ridge systems for whatever reason. And I was noticing whenever you drag that slope angle down to 37 degrees, then it starts shading every single one of those cliffs on the inside of those ridges. And it was like, it's pretty fascinating. So that's kind of like where I said I went and then I duplicated it on multiple properties to see like, is this just an anomaly for mine where it only picks them up at 37 degrees, or is this everybody's? And I started noticing that it's kind of everybody's. It was really, really effective. And then for the next portion, I drag it back to I believe 25 degrees, and then I just kind of block off that whole section that gets shaded from 25 degrees, and then go in field and I analyze it. And really, what I'm looking for at 25 degrees is a type of terrain feature that if you were to climb it as a human, you would every once in a while have to go to all fours or like reach for tree limbs and these types of things. Like it's just an uncomfortable climb for most people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's what I'm looking for. Anything less than that, then I don't really put much stock into it. But if it's truly difficult to traverse up and down, and you're having to go to all fours, then what I've seen with the drone is that a lot of times deer aren't traveling up, up and down those areas. And the only time that I've seen them travel in these types of 25-degree slope areas is whenever there's kind of a bench, like a 1 foot to a 2 foot bench carved into the landscape, into the side of that kind of terrain feature. And it's just an area where does and bucks kind of travel along inside of it. And it's a really, really tight funnel. I'm not sure. I haven't seen many mature bucks utilize those. I know that they do. I mean, there's no way that they don't walk on those every once in a while. But in the end, with the 25-degree terrain feature, I'm really looking for something, like I said, you have to go on all fours for. And the thinking is that if a mature buck had to bust away from something, like he picked up your scent or whatnot, he can run up and down that thing like nobody's business. But oftentimes he's not going to. So
Mhm.
you're just trying to eliminate that as an idea that he's going to use as an everyday travel route. And it's more of kind of an emergency situation. If he had to, he'll use it. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
and
that
one more thing on that as well. I didn't mention. I like to mention, if all you have as your terrain features are 25-degree terrain slopes, and that's everywhere, and then obviously the deer are going to be utilizing that because they kind of have to. But
Mhm.
anyways, that's all. So
Yeah. So, and then, yeah, I think that's really interesting. That video, I encourage everyone to go watch because you did a really good job of you do a really good job explaining a lot of the stuff on your channels, where you do a really good job of breaking down the information and making it make sense for people who are maybe newer, or even people that are looking at more aggressive terrain than maybe what they're used to. And so I think that was a really interesting video. Speaking of terrain features and also areas where you didn't necessarily see a lot of deer travel through. There was, I think it was one of your more recent videos where it was like a giant kind of a spine where it was, and I don't know if
yeah,
you know where I'm talking about, but basically,
yeah,
and we
oh
can
yeah,
put a B-roll clip in here, but basically, I don't know if it in the screenshot if it was north southwest orientation, but there was like a giant
mhm,
cliff, then a less subtle but still bluffy on the other side where you would think bucks would just run up and down that thing.
yeah,
And what was your findings on that?
yeah,
Because I
yeah.
know
No,
everyone has found something like this. Like, oh man, I'm gonna get on here and my scent's gonna blow off the
mhm,
cliff, and they're just gonna walk right down this 2-lane highway, and I'm gonna
yeah.
get an awesome shot.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was an insane terrain feature in terms of if you're just viewing it from a topographical perspective, you'll immediately think like tightest funnel on the property right there. That's a great spot. And then you're also undetected because, like you said, you have a bluff or maybe potential cliffs off to I think it was to the southwest because I think that spine, what you'd call it, was oriented from the northwest aiming down towards the southeast.
Mhm.
But that didn't really matter. Anyways, yeah, what I was finding was deer just weren't traveling across that thing that often, and I'd flown in that area quite a bit, and they almost always just walked around it. If they wanted to get from, and there was a lot of other terrain features that kind of forced them to stay within this area.
Mhm.
If they wanted to leave this area, they would have had to walk a long trek around. So basically, any of the deer that were wanting to take this little spine that you're talking about, they were trying to get to this peninsula to the south, where a guy had a food plot and then there was a pond or two kind of on it. And then there were also, it kind of turned into a little bit of an acorn flat as well. So there were a lot of acorns in that area. And what I was noticing is deer were kind of traveling. There was a clear cut to the north of it, and they were just traveling around it and then down a drainage and then back up the drainage on the other side, taking it was at least 2 times the distance to make that trek all the way around this spine. And instead of hitting across the spine, I started thinking about it even more as to why are deer doing that and why are they not utilizing this quick little highway that would just be perfect. And I think it's from the perspective that if you make it onto the quick little highway of the bridge itself that's kind of connecting these two pieces of land, then you have a predator magically appear on both sides of you, then you're screwed. Like you're going to have to either jump off the cliff to the southwest, or you're going to have to try to navigate the nasty terrain that was in the other direction, or you can try to run through your predators on either side of you. And I think that a lot of deer weren't willing to take that risk. The only time that I'd seen them take the risk was one of them did it. It was the 6x5 that I'd done research on. He did it it was pretty inclement weather on that day. And maybe he was just trying to avoid taking extra steps. And then I'd seen it happen a couple times during the rut with other bucks. And oftentimes they weren't mature bucks. They were they were a little bit younger bucks, 2 to 3,
Mhm.
maybe a 4-year-old in there every once in a while. I don't have the exact ages on all the deer on the property. I have some, but especially the mature ones, I'm pretty close. But yeah, the 2 to 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds are pretty hard to ID. But I know for a fact that the deer that were using it, oftentimes they weren't mature. So
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like just watching some of your videos, it's a lot of the paths of travel seems to be not obvious to me. I mean, when you start mapping everything out, it's like the way they dip around and go around and take longer routes, where I think humans were the apex predators. So like that land bridge,
Hmm.
perfect. Yeah, I'll walk that every single time.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's something kind of hard for someone just to figure out. And thankfully they have videos like yourself. But one of the other interesting things that I found was the amount of, I guess, you and we talked on the phone last week, but it was the efficiency of travel, morning versus evening. And I really want to dive into this because I feel that based off of what you had shown in your video, mornings seem to be a higher probability of connecting with a mature buck,
Yeah.
just by odds. Is that a fair assumption after your research?
Yeah, no, it's definitely what I've seen, and whenever I say efficiency of travel, if their efficiency route of travel, I don't particularly mean if you have a point A and a point B. If you as a human wanted to walk from point A to point B, what would be the least amount of terrain dip up and down type thing to connect you from those two sections? Um, the thing that I'm noticing makes them extremely efficient, and oftentimes they are kind of taking the least difficult terrain route across from point A to point B. But the main thing that I'm focusing on is their ability to intersect doe trails all along the way. And that seems to be most of their mission from kind of like in my area, what I was noticing at least last year was like October 25th all the way into January. And whenever they're traveling on those morning travel routes, they're semi straight and they're always terrain driven in terms of how they travel. And then all along the way, they're if you have a doe trail that's kind of going north to south, then they're almost always hitting it like east to west or slightly diagonal, or they're not walking perpendicular with it or parallel with it. And whenever they're doing so, as soon as they cross with the doe trail, they just stick their head down, they send check the ground, and they kind of stand there for a little while, and you that's whenever I realize like they are intersecting a trail at that moment, because they stop and they hesitate for a little bit and they scent check the ground pretty hard. And if he smells something, then he'll lift his head, kind of hook off of his main travel route, walk back, 50, 75 yards, and then all of a sudden I'll flip to a thermal camera and he's standing within 30 to 40 yards of 8 does. And it's like, whoa, you found those guys pretty quick. It's pretty
Wow.
impressive. And then in that situation, he doesn't move in on them. He's not moving right up inside of them and trying to chase around that doe. He's still scent checking the ground all over the place. He's just kind of walking back and forth and back and forth and trying to find and narrow down further which doe had piqued his interest in the first place. And if one is potentially an estrus, that's whenever he pushes in and he'll start to kind of find her out of the group and then shove her around and chase her out of the group and see if he can go better down. But if she's not ready or whatever is kind of going through his brain in that moment in time, then he'll just hook back off of that travel route back towards the does, make it right back to the intersection trail where he had last left off, and then he just continues on his morning travel route. Just keeps on walking. And oftentimes in an individual morning travel route through kind of that November into December timeframe, I was seeing them make these hooks off of their main travel route 3, 4, sometimes 5 times in a single route, and they're just hooking off and going and checking a little group of does, and then they'll just walk back onto their trail and continue on. And then the other fascinating thing that I noticed about it, and this could just be the properties that I was researching, but I think that I'd seen it enough that I feel like it's a thing, was oftentimes at the end of their morning travel route was whenever they were hitting scrapes. Um, they every once in a while they would walk and intersect with a community scrape in the middle of their travel route or kind of at the beginning. But in most cases, wherever the end of their travel route was, it seemed as if there were like 2 to 3 scrapes all along that area. And rubs, I'll cycle back to rubs. Rubs they're making all the way throughout that travel route, from the time that they get up all the way until the time that they're about to bed back down. They're just constantly hitting rubs throughout that time frame, and signpost ones, and then also just kind of random ones that probably weren't even there before, and they're making a new one type thing. But scrapes, they're almost always making them at the end of that route. And the thing that I'm noticing about the end of their travel route is a lot of times it's kind of ending at like 9 to 10:30 a.m. So if you're somebody that's going out and you're hunting in the morning and you're hunting kind of nearby or over a scrape, and you get down at like 8:30 a.m. because you're tired and you want to
He's
go
not
back
back yet.
home and eat a honey bun. Yeah, no, he's not back yet. So, and that's kind of where like maybe a lot of people have developed I don't know that it's a misconception because deer do move in the middle of the day, but a lot of people have started thinking like, if they get on a buck at like 10:30 a.m., then they just killed like a midday moving buck. And it's like, really, he was probably still on his morning travel route. He hadn't finished it. Like you picked him up at the tail end of it. Just because you didn't pick him up at the beginning doesn't mean that you didn't pick him up whenever he was moving in the morning. You picked him up on the end of his travel route at that time frame. So yeah, that's kind of the route of efficiency.
Yeah, and then conversely on the evening, in the video, it was a much shorter amount of movement, and also there was more deer typically.
Yeah.
So I want you to hear. I've always liked mornings because I'm not a great deer hunter, and usually when I kill a buck, it's usually he's by himself in the morning cruising
Yeah.
along, and he's not with a pack of deer. So
Yeah.
when I
Well,
watched it, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, and in the end, like if I added up every step in the evening versus the morning, total yards traveled, it's probably pretty close because he's constantly moving in the evening. He's just walking back and forth in kind of circles, and he's hanging out in this same little area. So the statistic that I started focusing on was actually net displacement over anything. So net displacement meaning if a deer's bedded in the morning and then he makes his travel route and then he beds back down, what's the distance between those two locations? And then same thing with the evening, whenever he's bedded back down throughout the middle of the day, and then he gets up and then he finishes his time at the end of that day and either beds back down or I run out of legal shooting light because I was focusing everything within legal shooting light for this study. Then what's the displacement between those two locations? What's the distance between those two? And in the morning, it was almost always 4 times greater than in the evening. Every once in a while, I did find a deer where they just decided to go on a long trek in the evening time frame. But for the most part, that was happening in the morning. And what that lended us to was a lot more solo style treks in the morning, which is where you're running into, where you're finding these lone traveling bucks and you're able to get on them without any other deer around. And oftentimes, whenever, kind of back whenever I did a lot of hunting and then photography, I was finding whenever I was out in the woods that um, I wouldn't see many deer. In the end, I would maybe see a doe walk by like 150 yards or something, but whenever the deer that would finally move 30 yards to me would come in, it was oftentimes a mature buck, and that's because I was positioning myself in locations where, in terms of a high odds to see a lot of deer, probably not that great, but in terms of a high odds to see a mature buck walk past you, pretty awesome. And that's one thing that I think a lot of people that are hunters maybe need to get over just a little bit. If you're out there and you're in a really good spot and based off terrain features and habitat diversity and all these things, you're in a like 100%er. This has to be a great location. And there's also maybe fresh buck sign nearby and all sorts of stuff and all these great variables for you. If you're going out and you're not seeing anything on those hunts, then in my opinion, you're just kind of upping your percentage odds every single time that you go back out into that same location, barring that you're going in and you're being undetected the entire time, entry and exit, and that you're potentially not blowing out any other deer in the area with your scent. Those kind of have to come in play. If you're going in and you're bumping like 15 deer on your way in and then like 10 deer on your way out, and then there's a doe down the ridge that's blowing all the way throughout the woods during your entire hunt, then okay, maybe don't go back to that location for a little while. But anyways, back to the evening. Yeah, the evening it was very lackadaisical, kind of lazy. A lot of the times, it just seemed as if they'd made it to their destination where they wanted to be, and they were kind of done. I mean, they checked out for the rest of the day. They're just going to hang around and browse, and every once in a while they would interact with a doe that was potentially an estrus. Especially, I think whenever you get into that, especially the peak rut time frame, everything that I say just throw it out the window. Like it doesn't really apply.
Just be in the woods.
Because just be in the woods because mature bucks are they're just hammering themselves to death during that time frame. And in terms of bedding frequency, they could make 3 to 5 beds during a single day, but those beds are only going to be like 15 to 30 minutes long, and they're going to take a quick little snooze, and then they're back up and on lightning, and they're trying to go out and find a doe as fast as they can. So yeah, but outside of that time frame, what I'm noticing is the evenings they're just very, very lazy behaving, and like you'd said, they're hanging around a lot of other deer in that time frame as well, which just makes hunting evenings a little bit more difficult. Even if you're a private land hunter and you're able to hunt over food plots and these custom situations that you've built for yourself, then you're not only fooling him, you're fooling all the other noses and eyes in the area. And you can even back off of that area and back into a staging area. But a lot of deer are traveling through that staging area as well, and they're just walking straight through them. And I don't know, it's a lot more of a difficult situation. And a lot of things are also variable dependent upon how your season has gone. If you have really high acorn production, your food plots hunting in them specifically might not be as viable. You might want to back out into the timber where there's acorns. And if it's deep winter and it snowed on the ground and all you're offering them in a food plot is winter rye, which is not that digestible, and they really don't like it that often until they have to eat it, then are you going to go in and you're going to eat the winter rye that's underneath the snow, or are you going to eat the high fat content, even though it's a little bit more acidic at this point, acorn that's out in the woods? So kind of think from the perspective of something that's trying to survive, they're going to choose the acorns in that situation. So yeah, I'm not sure if I answer your question. I feel like I'm rambling on.
No, this is all
But,
great. No, I think
yeah.
that illustrates kind of the point that I wanted to hear from your perspective about the movement in the morning versus evening. Here's a question for you. Do deer J-hook going back into their bed? Because there's all these whitetail isms of, I'm setting up and he's going to J-hook in this bed on this knob where he beds all the time. Where's the line of truth in that statement?
I
From what
haven't
you've seen?
I haven't seen it. That's just my opinion. I'm not saying they can't do it, but from what I've seen, oftentimes they're just pretty much walking. Like I said earlier, at the end of their morning travel route, they're kind of hitting a lot more scrapes.
Mhm.
From what I've seen, whenever they branch off of that section, I could almost draw a straight line right from the last scrape to where they just kind of oftentimes whenever they hit scrapes, they just kind of stand in that area for a long time. I've noticed as
Mhm.
well. They stand and they kind of ruminate and just kind of hang out. And
I mean,
I'm
what's a
not
long time?
exact
What's a long time? Like
like
20 minutes,
15
30?
to 30, yeah, 15 to
Okay.
30 minutes. Just kind of just literally sometimes I've seen them just stand and just stare in a certain direction for like 15 to 30 minutes. And it's like, are you going to move again? Because I'm kind of getting tired of watching you stand here. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's like I'm trying to understand why he's standing there. But yeah, from the moment that he decides he's done standing there and wasting his time, then he'll just walk pretty much a straight line. Obviously it's a little bit terrain driven and then
Sure.
bed right down. Yeah, I'm not seeing any dramatic J hooks or very intentional types of things like that. Pretty much ever. I don't have a memory of seeing, and I've watched a lot of mature bucks bed. I don't have a memory of seeing one J hook into a bedding location.
What are some other things that you've noticed with buck bedding? Because you know, in the world of whitetail, there's always there's these mini trends where things are super hot for a couple years. Buck beds was pretty hot, probably around, I don't know, 2018, 19, 20, and then thermal
Yeah.
hubs was another one that got really popular, which you do mention in some of your videos. But for me to remain focused, what are some other things you think people need to know about buck bedding that we may have wrong?
Yeah, I think well, entering all this research, I kind of had a lot of basic questions that I could ask myself, like, do deer bed on the leeward side of the ridge? Do they walk into a headwind? Like all that type of stuff. But until you started seeing it and how variable everything that they did was, it was really difficult to actually ask those questions and try to find a way to answer them because I've seen a mature buck bed on the windward side of a ridge. It was north wind, 25-mile-per-hour winds, and it was spitting ice, and it was 5 degrees outside. And he was bedding on the windward side of the ridge, facing the storm, head on. And he's like building ice crystals on his antlers and a little bit on his nose. And it's like, what are you doing right now? It went completely against all logic type thing. And from what I've seen, I think mature bucks, in particular, I wouldn't apply this to all deer. I would really start to focus this more on mature bucks, and maybe it makes them seem a little more special in people's eyes. I think that they prioritize thermals over wind direction a lot. Now you might come into a situation where wind is 15, 20, 25 miles per hour, and it's prevailing over thermals. In
Mhm.
that situation, then I think wind can potentially play a larger role. But whenever you have kind of subtle winds that, 1 all the way to 10 miles per hour, and they're really stable and not volatile, then I think they prioritize thermals over anything. And I think that goes also for how they travel across the terrain as well. I think
Mhm.
that they're utilizing thermals way over wind direction in those situations. So,
Mhm.
and thermals, not to interrupt you, thermals are a topic that I'm going to continue to like throw out there as an idea that I'm going to make a video on in the future, because I am working on. It's going to be a really long video, and it's going to be extremely science driven as well. And pretty much every video I make from here until that video comes out, I'm going to continue to joke that I promise I'll make a video on thermals. But it's just the difficulty with explaining thermals from a scientific standpoint and then reconverting it back into a hunter standpoint is attempting to put it into motion graphics so that everybody can really truly understand it, further than the mentality that in the morning they rise and in the evening they fall, and then you kind of get into the more advanced ideas where well, the sun is rising from the east, so then you have all the east facing slopes that are going to heat up first, and then everything that's not within that, they're going to continue to fall in those areas. And then you get into a meteorology perspective, and then you realize, like, okay, well, the only thing that a thermal actually is heat rising from the air. It's a column of heat rising, period. That's a thermal. So the hunting industry has taken thermals and kind of like coined all of its own terms off of it. And I think that the idea was to make it simpler for hunters, but I think that in the end, it's made it a lot more confusing for hunters, and in turn, that people have either oversimplified it or they just misunderstand it altogether. So the goal with that in the future will be to bring the actual science behind what is happening, like what in the heck is actually happening in all these situations, and then being able to break it down for people to analyze it from a hunter perspective, and probably re-simplify some of the wording for everyone, so that way we're not having to say all the scientific terms. But in the end, I think everyone will walk away with a lot better of an understanding on the topic.
Well, I look forward to that. In one of your there was, I can't remember what video it was, but it showed that a buck, in a general thermal hub, I think it was 40 acres or 80 acres or something. I don't know if you recall what I'm talking
it was
about.
80. Yeah.
Okay, so it's an 80-acre area where scent would pool, and then for someone listening to this, they're like, okay, all right, I'm trying to think of where I hunt. Is there a thermal pool? Because that's where that buck is. Based off of in the videos, like, you made it kind of clear that that deer would have been really hard to kill, just based off of the advantage there. Do you think there's some areas that may have a lot of sign, may have a lot of beds? You may find a bunch of shed antlers there, in the fall, or in the winter, that just cannot be hunted effectively. Like, is that a real thing?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think specifically at certain times of the year as well, because as the year goes on, deer have shifting goals throughout that entire time frame. So there will be a time frame, like, say, let's talk about the 6x5, who was the deer that was living in that 80-acre range. There's a time frame where he was moving, and like, you can kill him throughout that season. It's just a lot more difficult. And if you don't understand and you're not able to piece together the fact that he is living in such a small home range, then that just makes him that much more difficult to kill. Because say you had a trail camera in that area, and there was a pond kind of at the top of the ridge that was, to the east of his thermal hub that he was in. He frequented in that area pretty often with my drone. So let's say you had a trail camera in that area and you're getting pictures of them all the time. So in your brain, it's like, all right, I'm going to go in and I'm going to sit near this saddle right next to this pond, and I'm going to have the proper wind and proper everything, and really good entry exit, maybe drive an e-bike in or something. Well, you're trying to sneak into a core 80-acre area where, for one, he might not even be in the thermal hub on that day. But let's say that he was. He's surrounded by like 35, 40 deer in this area. And a lot of areas where people are hunting, they're actually way overpopulated, and to the level that people don't understand. Like, if you're running a trail cam and you're getting pictures of like 3, 4 does or something on it every once in a while, I wouldn't doubt that there's 10 to 15 more standing within 100 yards of that camera as well at that certain time frame. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole yet, because I'm going to try to stay focused on what I'm talking about. But if he's in that 80 acres and you're trying to break into it where there's 35 other deer, or even if there's 15 other deer, then someone else is going to pick you up before he does. And it just, you're gonna blow out that area every single time. So you kind of have to pull a Bill Wink in this situation, where it can take years to realize how small this deer's home range truly is. But in Bill's example, he had realized that this one buck had lived in like a 25 to 35 or something like that, I can't remember, core area. And if he walked in that core area, he was screwed. But he realized he needed to feather the outside of it all the time. And what comes with that is he has to hunt a lot to kind of up his odds to be able to kill this deer. But he really wanted to kill this deer, so he was finding ways to be able to go out and hunt a lot. He's also Bill Wink, so he could do that. And throughout that time frame, though, he never went into the core area. He's staying on the outside of it that entire time. And I believe that whenever you have a deer like this, with this kind of individualistic style of behavior, then you have to feather the edges of him. You can't go into his core area. And every once in a while, like you'd seen on the map on that video, he left the core area. He did leave it very few times. You know, out of 30 plus days, I think he left it like 7 times or five or 7 times. And that's not like throughout a whole day. Like that's an individual morning movement that he had. And I think that it was kind of like a spur in his brain, like, oh, let's go check if there's does and estrus in this direction. But he just kind of seemed a little more lazy in general. That particular deer did. And but yeah, no, I think that in those situations you have to feather the outside of it. And I think that's where, if you have a deer like the mainframe 10 that I'd studied last year, a winter that I called him, and some people can make fun of me for calling him that, but he had a really, really massive home range. He was, I'd estimate it to be around 1,200 acres, but it could have been even larger than that. And if you had 2 trail cameras and you had a trail camera on the north side of the property and you're getting pictures of them on the south and they're a mile and a half away, then it's pretty clear at that moment that that deer is a pretty mobile buck. He's pretty active in that time frame. And I think that makes him a lot more huntable in that situation. Now, you're probably going to have a lot more hunts where you just see absolutely nothing, but you can position yourselves, especially in hill country, in terrain-driven areas where he's going to be forced to make these travel routes. And as long as, once again, you're going in undetected, then and exiting undetected, then you can hunt at a pretty high frequency in these locations, and you're going to fail a lot, but there's going to be a time where you don't fail and he walks by, and you're probably going to be able to get a shot. And honestly, I doubt that your failure rate would be as high as I make it out to be. I kind of like to preface the fact that you are going to go out and not see anything if you're really going to be targeting terrain features that mature bucks travel extremely hard, just because they're different. They're wired differently than all the other deer in the area. So you're going to be positioning yourselves in locations where you're just not going to see a high density of deer walking past you. But whenever you do, it's going to be something that you're probably going to be pretty interested in shooting.
So, what about, you mentioned access, briefly to there. Have you done any research with, sending out a test dummy, like, hey, go ride your bike over here and see how the deer reacts, and hey, test dummy number 2, you go walk over here on this farm. Have you done that?
Yeah, I have a little bit on a pretty small scale, and from what I found, it's all property driven. So obviously, I haven't done anything public land yet, which I think that's really where I would want to see something be done, is on public land, because private land, it pretty much, keep hitting my microphone. Private land is pretty much driven by how frequently you're on the property. So, and in what style you're doing so on. So if you and your wife constantly take hikes on the property, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal for you to go out and walk to your stand. But if you did that, here's where things get interesting, is you would need your wife to come with you to make it the most effective. Because if you walk out to your stand and you just stop at your stand and then you climb up in it, then if there's a deer within 50 to 150 yards of earshot, they're going to know that something just stopped right in that location, and they're going to be able to pick it out. Whereas if you walked with another person and that person just kept on walking and they left the area, then all the deer think everything's cleared. Wife and husband were on a hike again today and they just walked out. Same thing with, if you're on ag property and there's tractors and trucks and UTVs and stuff driven around a lot on the property, then you can utilize that to your advantage all the time and be dropped off by a tractor, a UTV, a truck at your stand location. Just be driven straight into your stand location, dropped off, climb up in it, truck drives out, and then within 10 to 15 minutes, deer are going to start being active. It depended upon whenever you go out, obviously, but they're not bothered by it at all in those situations. And like my main property, the hill country property, there's a lot of UTVs. It's one of the only ways to travel across the property, or you're just going to get stuck 24/7. So there's a lot of UTVs that travel across it. And we found a long time ago, this wasn't like new information, but we found a long time ago that if you were the last person in the trail, that was, you dropped off like 5 other guys that were going hunting on the UTV, and then you're the last person, and then you have to park the UTV and shut it off, you're screwed. You have a terrible hunt every single time, and everybody else had a great hunt. So it's like, there's something to this, and it's pretty consistent. So you always tried to be not the last person in the end of the UTV trail, so that way you could have the best hunt possible. And so oftentimes we started throwing that towards the older people. It's like, you guys can be the ones that fail. But yeah, no, that's kind of the general consensus is it heavily depends upon how you guys use your properties. And if you're on it a lot and you're active with different types of vehicles, or say you're on it a lot with an e-bike, I think the e-bike is the one that gets the most hairy. E-bikes are extremely effective if you're able to drive them into an area where you're not going to be detected. E-bikes kind of creep deer out. If they
Mm,
see this silent creature driving towards them and and they're flying at like 20 miles per hour, that's a pretty creepy experience for them, I feel like. And even if you bump a deer, oftentimes they're still going to circle back and come back through that area. But they can't hear you, and I feel like they really like to be able to hear you coming in. So I would almost even recommend, like, say you travel your private property with an e-bike all the time, like bring around like a little speaker, portable speaker or something, and just play noise on it. Or some of the e-bikes actually have speakers built into them. Play something on it and allow everything in the area to constantly know that you're in that area, and they'll become
mm.
really they'll become really conscious of you. And I don't know though, because at the same time, then now you're gonna have to have somebody come in and drop you off with an e-bike. The greatest thing to be is dropped off though, in those situations. If you're walking in, then like on foot, then you're gonna have to treat the situation as if you're hunting your stand. You have to hunt your stand the entire situation in, and as if you're literally going to be putting an arrow through the base of it at that time frame.
Spot and
And
stalk into the tree
yeah,
stand.
yeah, literally spot and stalk your tree stand that entire time frame. So,
Yeah.
and if you see anything that's going to prevent you from getting to it, then there's a pretty good chance you're not going to be hunting in your tree stand that day. So
Yeah.
you're going to have to kind of hunt based off of those variables. That's the best way to do it on foot, from what I've seen. But in terms of if just like bearing down and walking straight to your stand, you're going to have a pretty big impact if you just make all the noise in the world. So
Yeah, I think there's like two different approaches to a tree stand that a lot of guys fall into. Is like, I want to get there as fast as possible to
yeah,
limit the disruption, because if it takes me 20 minutes to get there versus 40 minutes of taking my time, like I feel like most people just brunt their way in there,
yeah,
and I feel like a lot of I would agree with the second of like budgeting more time to get in there.
yeah,
Like you're hunting, because you are hunting.
yeah,
Like the
yeah. And
hunting
I do
doesn't
I do
begin when you get
actually
to the tree.
I do actually have some research coming in the future. I won't say who I'm collabing with potentially, but um, there will be some of just busting through the woods as fast as you can and hitting grunt call type situation.
Oh
Um,
man.
yeah, you might know who I'm talking about after that. But basically, trying to sound like a deer as you just
Yeah.
bust it through the woods as fast as you can, and seeing the impact on deer after that situation. And my belief is that if you do that, I think you're probably going to need to get your bow ready. That's
Mm,
just my opinion. I
mhm.
think within 5 minutes, if there was something nearby, you're going to see them pretty quick, and that it might be one of the most effective ways for entry and exit. For, I guess you could just call it entry at that point, because you're probably going to get a shot on something. You might, I don't know. So that's I'm really excited to research that one. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm so bullish on all this research because I just feel like it's so exciting to follow along with all these different things, because like we can always hypothesize. We've all hypothesized a lot of these different things, and you build your own guesses and your own thought process. But granted, the research right now is on one main property that's getting posted. But regardless, I feel like there's so much really exciting things. Now, here's a question for you: what's the most surprising mature buck behavior you've documented that contradicts conventional wisdom?
yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I feel like anytime it gets into like contradicting conventional wisdom, I just want to throw back in thermals into the conversation,
Sure.
just because of the lack of understanding of it. But I don't really know if that plays a role in conventional wisdom. Kind of the main thing that I've seen that a lot of people just have in the back of their brain is the idea of bucks bedding on the leeward side of the ridge, and also maybe even the way that they travel with the wind, and in terms of traveling into a headwind and stuff like that. And from what I've seen, you can just throw all that out the window and start trying to apply thermals into all those situations. And I've seen them bet on leeward, windward, kind of off on the side, and these weird little locations. And until you start applying thermals as to why they're in those locations, you don't really understand it. And
Mm,
same thing with the way that they're traveling. Traveling with a tailwind or maybe a slight crosswind, but still in their tail, and really, across the. You have to think about this once again. From everything is being terrain driven. If we're only looking at wind, and say he gets up and he walks away from the wind and he's at a tailwind, he can't walk with a tailwind from point A to point B. There's just no way, because especially in hill country. Now, if you're on ag land, I guess maybe he could, but in hill country, he's going to have to be terrain driven all the way along that process. So he's going to be tailwind, he's going to be slight tailwind, he's going to be crosswind, and then there may even be sometimes where he has to kind of full circle back up and then aim back into a headwind, even if he's trying to go straight north to south. and then he'll circle back to a tailwind. So like all across the way, he might have been at a crosswind for 20 to 30% of the time, and then maybe 60% of the time he was kind of at a bit of a tailwind, and then the other point, he may have had to circle back into a headwind and fill in the rest of the percentage with a headwind. So it's like in terms of that, it just, I haven't seen any of it. It just doesn't really hold much bearing either. So
Yeah. Well, listen, do you think guys that shoot bucks just get lucky? Like with
oh
all
yeah,
this
yeah.
being said, where it's like, hey, this is pretty random, and the mature bucks are really smart of using thermals to their advantage. And that particular buck, 7 out of 30 days was the short window of opportunity.
Mhm.
When I hear all that, like, man, obviously you can stack your odds, you can be smart to your point, not
Yeah.
barging into the thermal hub, but it sounds like if you wanted to, let's say, Derek, I'm giving you your bow back, you're going to go hunt this year.
Mhm.
I mean, do you hunt completely different with this information now?
I'm
Of
sure
like,
that I would.
it's
Yeah,
somewhat,
yeah. I
it's like
mean,
random
yeah.
and
My whole process would be completely different in terms of how, like, say you just set me on a new property, but it was hill country.
yeah,
I feel like I would be extremely effective in that world.
terrain being
Yeah,
terrain and thermals being the key
yeah, yeah.
focuses.
Just being able to focus on those two variables in general, and also from being able to analyze topo at the beginning, and not just terrain features and thermals, but looking at habitat diversity as well, and trying to play that game a little bit more. But yeah, no. Ultimately, I think you could say 90+% people get lucky in terms of hunting. I mean, look at social media, and whenever you start seeing hunting pictures get posted, whenever deer are getting put on the ground, oftentimes it's happening during that rut time frame or
Or
kind of
anything
closer to
goes.
rifle
Yeah,
season. And really they're just kind of going out and hunting this random time frame where you may not be able to target a specific buck as easily during the rut, but in terms of just seeing a mature buck, your odds are never higher than that time frame. And getting one sub 30 yards is always difficult, even even in the rut time frame. But once you start introducing a rifle into the equation, and you're in a situation where you're going to have higher mature buck visibility, then yeah, I mean, a lot of people are going to get lucky in that time frame. So
yeah. What I mean, has there been anything that you feel that people underestimate when it comes to mature bucks? I mean, and it seems like my guess is your answer is going to be in relation to utilizing thermals, but is there anything else that comes to
yeah,
mind?
yeah, I mean, I could pretty much say thermals for most questions, but yeah, to try to spur one off that's not related to that. um Underestimate, I'm trying to think. I don't know. My brain keeps going to like staging areas and whatnot, but I'm not really
Sure.
sure why, because I'm not sure that that's like an underestimated thing. But um, I think that one thing a lot of people underestimate is the importance of um, how your season has been in terms of watershed. So like if you're in a drought season, then that's going to have a ridiculous impact on the rest of your season and the way that deer interact with one another, and the way that they go out and they search for food sources and these types of things, and also in terms of where they live. If you're in a situation and you have a massive drought like I am in the Midwest, then um, acorn production is probably going to be down. Native browse is probably going to be down. All these things, and if you're in a private land situation and you can go out and you can supplement it with food sources, then come late November, early December, and all the way into January, your property is probably going to be pretty stinking effective in some cases in comparison to properties nearby where there's no other available food sources. So yeah, I think my answer would be probably underestimating the value on a year by year basis and analyzing every single year as its new, like in its new self, versus just going into the hunting situation and thinking that you can hunt purely based off of these variables that are terrain driven, and go and sit in these really, you know a lot of people on private land specifically, they kind of have like the greatest stand, like this stand has killed 10 mature bucks and this stand has killed one or two or something,
Yeah.
and just kind of year by year going back to that main stand that everybody's always killed a mature buck out of, because it just seems to be better for whatever reason. And I think that you could probably have quite a few of those stands like across your property. You're just not finding them and hunting them. And I think that they're really driven based off of the conditions for that season. And
Mhm.
you can kind of up your odds whenever you start to play that game as well.
One of the oldest adages is, a hunter's job is, there's one tree that has more mature bucks walk by it than any other tree in the farm. Your job
Yeah.
is to find it.
Yeah.
Have you been able to find that on the research piece? Like this
Yeah, I mean, I
particular
think I
tree?
know. Yeah, I think I know the tree, but I don't think you can hunt it. So
Okay, all right.
yeah, I would say that, and I'd say that's probably a common theme for a lot of properties is that the one tree where a lot of mature bucks are going to walk by, they're pretty much unhuntable in terms of gaining entry and access without being detected. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my quick answer to that.
If someone could remember one thing that you say today that's going to help them this fall, what is it? With all the
I
research.
would, yeah. I mean, um, probably from like a basic standpoint and just making a general recommendation, terrain features, if you have them, are kind of everything. And going into it from a scouting perspective and just preemptively mapping those terrain features, you can really up your odds by hunting at the tops of, in particular, one of my favorite things that I've seen mature bucks utilize is the top section of drainages that are really steep. If you have a
Mhm.
drainage that's just dramatically steep on the inside of it and there's no bench within it, there's no way for them to travel across it, they have to walk around this drainage, then if you hunted 15 times throughout the season and you went and you sat at the top of that drainage every single time undetected, you would have success. I cannot see you not having success because I've mapped every single drainage on every property that I've researched, and every mature buck has walked and wrapped the tops of these really steep drainages, and I just think that they're amazing locations. So
So with thermals in mind and wind, what let's say the top of the drainage is north facing. So very top of the drainage, north, very bottom of the drainage, south. W- Where are you supposed to have your wind blow or your thermals pole in that
yeah, I mean,
scenario?
I'm wanting everything to go down into the drainage.
Okay.
So, however, and even in some cases, if you sit far enough off the drainage, like off the top of it,
Yeah.
and you have a wind coming from the south, say it's like a 3 mile per hour wind, you can probably get away with still sitting there and having your scent kind of pull down below you because everything kind of acts. Whenever you think of thermals, kind of think of water in a way, and everything's going to pull and kind of boil below you, and then it's just going to run right down that drainage. But now, if you have a really strong south wind, 10 plus miles per hour, then it'll probably shove you beyond that location. And also, it kind of depends on where the sun's at that time frame. If it's 12 o'clock in the middle of the day and the sun's just beating down on your back, there's a lot of variables that can play into it. But yeah, no, in a perfect world, you're going to have wind coming from the north, and it can be kind of slightly subtle and maybe a slightly cloudy day or finding ways to hunt in the evening. Any way that your scent can go either down into the drainage or be blown just out of that location altogether with rising thermals. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's next for Whitetail Research? You've bolted on the scene here, and I know there's a lot of exciting things, but um, what aside from the thermal video, like what are some things that you're really excited to share about or share coming down the pipeline? I mean, as excitement of season increases, I know there's gonna be more people laying in bed before they go hunting the next morning of like, all right, what Derrick posts? I need some I
Yeah.
need some insight.
Yeah. I think I have a lot of stuff going from like a season by season or like a time of season by time of season basis. So I'm going to
Yeah.
focus. I have a new video coming out soon that's going to focus really heavily on the early season and kind of why I believe it's the best time frame to target a mature buck. And then we're going to go into kind of like October, and then there's going to be some scouting tips and then hunting tips for October, scouting tips, hunting tips for November, and really I'm going to maybe not try and focus it as much as on the month by month basis, but more so like a pre-rut, post-rut
Yeah.
kind of time frame. And then yeah, I have a lot of science-based things coming, not just in the thermal realm. Like in this next video, I'm going to actually be kind of breaking down acorn production and what causes an acorn to actually fall from a tree from a scientific perspective. And then I think that that'll actually potentially help a lot of people be able to go out and identify the first trees that are going to be dropping acorns, which in some areas acorns are already dropping like off of trees because of the drought and how bad it's been, which is actually a disadvantage. So that's a thing that people needed to go out and document. If you have trees that are already dropping acorns, then identifying that feed tree might be easier to go out and find which one they're hitting, but there's going to be a lot of acorns pretty soon, and probably by the beginning of season, because it's the first or second or third whatever of November or of September right now, and we've got almost 15 days until the beginning of season. So there's going to be a lot more trees that drop acorns, which makes hunting acorns a lot less of a viable option because everything's going to be so sporadic. But anyways, I'm going to be going in deeper into the science on a lot of these different types of topics. and trying to bring it into motion graphics so that way everyone can kind of understand it a little bit better.
Yeah. No, that's super, super exciting.
Yeah.
Anything else I should have asked you that you wanted to talk about here today?
Yeah. I mean, not really off the top of my head. I think that one thing that's always worth bringing up on every podcast is there's probably a slight bit of controversy going into anything as it pertains to a thermal drone, and especially whenever you're watching them and then potentially trying to educate people from a hunting perspective off of it. And I think one thing that's worth saying is that if GPS color studies could tell you everything that I can tell you so far off of my research, then they would be already, but they can't. And it essentially, like, I'm trying to do the same thing in that regard, and show people how to take this type of information and apply it to their own hunting situation. But in the end, my goal is not to be able to allow people to stay at home and just kind of pick out these really high odds situations on their property and once or 5 times a season go out and hunt them and think that they're going to have success just based off of everything that I've told them. My goal is to find a way to get people back into the woods and kind of back into the woodsmanship side of things, and kind of like I'm semi anti technology as it goes, which is kind of fascinating because I'm a drone guy and like I'm this nerdy tech guy type person, but I'm kind of using the technology to show people that really tech and trail cameras and applications in terms of like deer AI coming in the future and these types of things, they should not be what dictates every bit of your hunting decisions. You should be able to go out in field and do actual scouting and then make that applicable to the full picture of things as to your understanding of where you're hunting, and then go out in field and spend a lot more time out there actually hunting and scouting and putting boots on the ground and kind of going back, back in time a little bit more, and quit relying so heavily on technology and just going out and stinking hunting. So
I have two really quick questions. One is, if the thermal drone tells us about everything we want to know about whitetails, mature whitetails, do you think that takes away any of the allure of a mature whitetail? Because I mean, that's the allure of mature whitetails, is they feel like, man, we just can't figure them out, and it's
yeah,
this game of cat and mouse, and I don't think the research you're providing is taking that away. I really don't. But
yeah,
I could see someone making that argument of like, man, yeah, this is, now we have this, we have that, we have this, and
yeah.
it's not even hard to kill a mature buck anymore. Which,
Well, I think in the end, one thing people need to understand is that mature bucks are all individuals. So, and also all of the variables are changing on a year by year basis. So this year, my research is going to look dramatically different from last year's research, and that's based on a lot of variables. But the main one being just kind of the weather conditions that we've had and the drought. But also, you have situations where rut, peak rut for my area is November 10th to November 20th, based off of just general knowledge. But that really can fluctuate all the way to the beginning of November. It can fluctuate all the way to the end of November. And um, everything is season by season basis. And also all the mature bucks are really individuals as it all pertains. And like with Winter, he was highly active and really energetic that last year. And that other deer was really kind of sedentary and lived in that 80-acre range. And he's just very calm and lazy. And next year, they're probably going to be a little bit similar to that. But my deer that I'm researching aren't just like your deer that you're trying to hunt out at your property. And
Mhm.
in the end, if you're going to just go out and try to kill a mature buck, like, you have to be able to fool him somehow, some way.
To
And
get within
no
bow range.
matter, yeah, to get within bow range. And no matter how much I tell you, and all these, I could tell you every single, you could send me your property and I could tell you every single spot to go and sit in. If you don't actually apply yourself as a hunter and become halfway decent at gaining entry and exit, and not make all the noise in the world while you sit in your stand or sit on your phone your entire time that you're sitting in your stand, you're probably still going to suck whenever you go out and you hunt. You're going to actually have to like be a hunter in that situation, and go and even once again, like, even if I drop all the pins in those locations and I give you everywhere to hunt on your property, in the end, then you're probably going to have to hunt those stands quite a few times to piece together whether or not they're actually really effective, and then move them based off of the conditions that you're seeing in person. And I personally think one of the most effective ways to hunt is with a saddle, and being able to go in and be just in and out, in and out, in and out, and kind of moving yourself all the time versus jacking around with a ladder stand all the time. But yeah, I don't know. In the end, though, no matter how much information I feed you, if you don't find a way to apply it to your own personal situation, you're not going to kill mature buck. So
Yeah, I feel like it's very good entertainment with education, and I feel like that's my opinion on it. Like, it is
yeah,
entertainment and it is education. What about is real quick too for someone that feels like they're left out? Like, I don't hunt in hill country. There isn't a lot of terrain changes.
yeah.
I wish I wish you would have asked Derrick what can I pay attention to in a more flatter area or more subtle terrain. I know you probably haven't flown a ton of. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't
I
flown those
have.
type of. Okay, so what could you tell me about that so those people
Yeah.
don't feel left out?
Yeah, I have a lot of videos coming as it pertains to ag country, but from my experience, a lot of ag properties are so heavily densed with deer, like I mean, it is unreal. I've seen some areas where if you're on a 1,000 acre parcel, there's 450 to 600 deer in that one particular
Crazy.
area, and it's just like, how do you hunt that undetected? And I think you have to realize in a lot of those settings, you're not going to go undetected. There's almost no way. So you have to start to piece together the deer that you're bumping and the effect that they have on the other deer around them. And that kind of goes into like this hierarchy scheme where if you have mature doe Karen over here and she pulls your scent and she flags her tail and she lets everyone in the area know that like there's something going on, then every other deer that picks up that Karen is the one that said so, they're all on edge now. Everyone's kind of fleeing from that location. But if all you did was go in and bump like a 1, 2, 3 year old, young buck or a younger doe or some fawns and stuff like that, then the impact is negligible on ag land from what I've seen. It's
Mm,
you almost have zero effect. And there's even some cases where say a lot of deer are out feeding in a soybean field, say 100, and you bump a younger buck or something out of the corner of a field, like maybe your thermals had run down the foliage and everything that was in that area, and it pulled right into him, and he received your scent. Then he knows something's there and he's looking back right at you. So he knows for a fact that you're there, and then he busts and he blows and he flags his tail and runs across the field. All of their 100 deer or all of their 99 deer, they just kind of stand there and look at him and they're like, all right, well, I'm going to keep eating. Like that's not a big deal. But if the 5 or 6 year old mature buck in the group kind of moves over to your ear and he pulls your scent and he stares at you and he flags his tail and he runs, all other 99 deer are gone at that very moment. So kind of understanding how that hierarchy works and the deer that you are going in and the deer that you are bumping in ag land. And also for me, the biggest thing with ag land, your biggest advantage that you have over hill country is going to be the availability to utilize tractors and trucks and all these types of things for access, so long as you have another person to help you with it. But if you can, then you can really position yourselves deeper in a property because you're going to drive in and you're going to bump 30, 40, 50 deer whenever you're driving into your stand location, but it has zero effect in most cases if you're in a truck or a tractor or something. So you can be dropped in, climb up in your stand location, and within 15 to 30 minutes you're going to have activity of these deer moving back to their area because they thought the tractor's done, truck's done with whatever they were doing, the farmer's done, he's heading back out, time to move back to my location that I actually preferred over where he just pushed me. And so yeah, but there's a lot more as it pertains to ag country as well. And there's also a lot of variable types of ag land where some ag you have like little pockets of 10 acre timber all over the place, and it's just 99% ag all everywhere. And then there's some properties where you have ag land kind of down in the flat bottoms, and then you have a little bit of kind of terrain features with mature timber on the backside of it. That's mainly what I've done so far is where you have a little bit of kind of timber in the backside of it, and then really low bottom type ag land. But in the end, I mean, there's still 300 acres or so of actual proper ag, in this one location. So I think I think it can still be applicable for a lot of people. But in terms of those guys that it's just like true flat land with a little bit of pockets of timber here and there and windmills in every direction, then I think those areas are going to be a little bit harder yet. Unless you have a rifle, then they're not as
yeah.
hard.
Well, I
Yeah.
think even in those scenarios too, there's probably across the Midwest, cattle were ran on almost every single farm at one point. So there's probably an old cattle fence. There's probably a fence gap somewhere. There's still probably some sort of transition. And
Yeah.
when people say like, it's flat as a pancake here, and then if you
Yeah.
really look at it, like, well, there's a roll or there's a knoll here or there's a creek that runs through here where so I feel like it's as keen in on those things is based off what you're saying, and it sounds
Mhm.
like it's just a true game of chess. Of I'm going to sacrifice a pawn or two to set up for my next move to hopefully say checkmate on the buck. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I can scare that little doe or I can scare that little buck as long as it puts me in the position to say checkmate, in the
Yeah.
next day or two.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Well, that's awesome, man. Well, if people haven't ran across your YouTube channel, where can they do so? And I really encourage everyone to do so, because I think your delivery and editing and cadence and dry sarcasm is very
Yeah.
fresh for this space, because most people don't do that, and I think it's just a breath of fresh air. So, where can people find you?
Yeah, pretty much Whitetail Research across the board on all socials. Obviously, I'm right now I'm mainly focused on YouTube, but I have Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I even think, but I kind of hate social media, so I don't post that often to it. Um, at some point, my Instagram will probably start being filled with a lot more photography, because I am a wildlife photographer, and I think that they're also going to maybe tie into the videos that I have coming in the future. There are some video ideas. I don't mind giving this out, because I guess if someone wants to try to copy me, they can. But I'm just going to make a better video than you do. I'm going to go out and study a deer for like 3 to 5 days, and then go and hunt him with my camera,
Yeah.
and try to get close with, like I have been in the past, and take pictures of him. But we're going to be hunting him based off of the drone variables as to what we've seen. So trying to pattern him off of the drone, and just seeing if it's even possible. Like, like you'd ask, like, can I make it to where everybody's going to be able to go out and kill a mature buck every single day type situation? Um, I'm going to do it where I actually just watch a deer, one particular deer, for 3 to 4 days, and then we take all of these variables and kind of like create the highest spots to go out and try to kill him. And then I'm going to go out and see if that would actually work. And my guess is it'll work every once in a while, but more often than not, it's not going to. So, but anyways, and then I also have a website, whitetailresearch.net or .org. I don't own the .com variant. I don't have that kind of money. But on there right now, it's just kind of, there's an about me and a contact page if you want to contact me about anything. But at some point, I would actually like to do a blog on it. And I know whenever I say that, all the real men out there are kind of like, this guy is going to make a blog, like one of those people. But what I mean by that is, at the end of like a real research video, creating a paper format where maybe there's some more of the statistics and data that I was using to make my claim inside of that sheet, and people can go back and look at it, and it'll kind of read as like a college level style paper a little bit, and it'll just be another resource where if somebody wants to deep dive off of a research topic I did, they can continue to dive down that trail and read it, and maybe only 10 to 15 people will read it in the end, but I think that'd be pretty cool. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that's super cool. Thank you so much for hopping on here today.
yeah, man, I appreciate it.